Welcome to Mixamo Animation Secrets. In this video you can expect to learn how to make animations loop, how to make animations play in place and why that is useful, how to make a character walk in the exact direction that you want it to, and how to combine animations without the annoying teleporting issues. Also how to tweak animations, and even how to mix them. I will assume that you know the basics of Mixamo, such as rigging your character and downloading basic animations. But if you're completely new to Mixamo, you can check out my previous videos. You can now get access to all CG Dive tutorials, including my extensive paid courses, unreleased videos, and supporter-only content for just $5.99 a month. Check out academy.cgdive.com/subscription. The first useful technique is looping animations. First, you have to ensure that your animation can loop, meaning that the first frame and the last frame of the animations are more or less the same. If that's the case, you can just set the end of the timeline to the end of the animation, and then if you play, you'll see that the animation is looping. But if you want to make the animation loop indefinitely, let's expand the end of the timeline, select the armature, expand this area, switch to graph editor, go to pose mode, select all of your bones, press A to select all keyframes, then go to channel, extrapolation mode, make cyclic. And now you can already see it in the curves, but this animation will keep looping for as long as you set the timeline. Okay, next you may have an animation that moves in space like this. If we make it cyclic with the exact same technique, it will kind of work. But you'll notice that the animation resets to the initial position at every cycle. To fix this, select your armature, go to pose mode, enable X-ray, and select the hips bone. Expand the transforms and hide all rotation transforms and scale as well. Now press A to select everything and delete on the numpad to zoom in. And you'll notice a transformation curve that goes in a straight line and then abruptly goes down. So select this curve, go to modifiers, and switch the repeat mode to repeat with offset, before and after. Now if you play the animation, it will loop and the character will keep walking forward. But what if you're using the Mixamo control rig, which you can create with the Mixamo add-on? This is something that I covered in the previous videos. So I have the same walking animation and it doesn't loop yet. I'll go to the Mixamo add-on and create my control rig and apply the animation. So now I have the exact same animation, but animated using the Mixamo rig. I can do something similar, go to pose mode, select everything, go to the graph editor, select all curves, channel, extrapolation mode, make cyclic. Now the character will teleport back at every cycle. So to fix that, select the hips control, focus on the location transforms. And again, I want to select this curve and switch its modifier to repeat with offset. Now the character will kind of keep going forward, but the legs and arms will start lagging behind. So we have to do the same for the leg IK and arm IK. And for these IK controllers, you need to set repeat with offset for X, Y, and Z location. So that was Y. Let's go to X and set it to repeat with offset. And finally Z. Now this leg should keep going forward, but the other ones still lag behind. So let's set up the offset. Same for the arms. Now the character should be able to move forward indefinitely. Okay, so now we have a looping animation, but it relies on this cyclic modifier to create the loop. And that is fine, but in some cases you may want to make real keyframes. Notice how only the first 30 frames have real keyframes, and after that the curve just cycles procedurally. So you can select all of your controls. In pose mode, go to Pose, Animation, Bake Action. Set the end frame. Usually I would enable visual keying, but in this case it doesn't work well, so keep it off. Do not clear the constraints, because that can break this particular rig. If you want to override the current action, you can enable this option, or you can disable it if you want to keep a copy of the original loop. Then press OK. And there is the whole animation baked. As you can see, we have real keyframes up to frame 250. Now let's talk about removing the forward motion of the character. Or it could be the sideways motion sometimes. We just saw how we can make the character keep walking forward, which is nice, but having it walk along a curve, for example, would be quite difficult. And removing the forward motion can make our lives much easier. For many animations, especially the walking and running animations, Mixamo has a special option called In Place. If you just tick it, the character will start walking in place. And that's all you have to do. Then you just download your animation and it will be imported that way in Blender. However, some animations, for example, the hurricane kick, does have forward motion, but does not have the in-place setting. So let's try to fix that in Blender. And I'll also download this action, which has a little bit of a sideways movement. Now in Blender, let's import these animations. I'll focus on the hurricane kick first. I'll go to Edit Mode, enable X-ray, select the hips bone, Shift D to duplicate it, and then right-click to cancel the movement. Then use individual origins and scale up this bone a little bit, just to distinguish it. Then go to Pose Mode. And interestingly, the animation of this original hips bone was not copied, and that is exactly what we want. So now I'll select this hips copy, then Shift select the original hips bone and press Ctrl Shift C and choose copy location. Then go to the Constraints tab. Now if I play the animation, you'll see that it already plays in place. But the constraint is influencing the height of this animation. To avoid this, I can disable the Z-axis. We're using world space, so you can just look at this gizmo here and it will tell you which axis you want to work with. What we really want to disable here is the Y-axis, so I can also uncheck X. And now the animation will keep its height, and it will also oscillate a little bit on the X-axis, but it won't move forward on the Y-axis. So now we have the animation playing in place. You may want to bake this action so that it doesn't rely on the constraint. Go to Pose Mode, select all bones with A, Pose, Animation, Bake Action, choose Visual Keying and Clear Constraints, and I'm going to override the current action. And also I want to limit the bake to frame 56. So let's do this again, Bake Action, frame 56, Visual Keying, Clear Constraints, and Override Current. Press OK. And now we'll have the action in place, and I can go to Edit Mode, select this additional bone that I created, delete it, go to Pose Mode, and I'll have the exact same animation in place. Then I can go to Graph Editor, select everything, make cyclic, and I'll have this animation cycle forever. Let's try this again with the capoeira animation. So I'll hide these meshes and unhide the capoeira armature. And let's do the same thing, edit mode, select this bone, Shift E, duplicate it, make it a little bit larger, go to pose mode, select this bone, Shift select the original hips bone, Control Shift C, copy location. And now we mainly want to constrain the movement in the x-axis, so I can uncheck Y and Z and play it. So here's the action, and you can see how it stays at the world origin. Again, I can go to the last keyframe, then pose, animation, bake action with all bones selected, and then I'll set end frame to 104. And with these settings, press OK. Delete the additional bone. Make my animation cycle if I wanted to. If you're using the Mixamo control rig, my advice would be to first remove the root motion, make the animation play in place, and then assign it to the control rig. So for this one, I can just go to Mixamo, create control rig, and choose apply animation. And here I have the exact same animation on the control rig. Now let's say that we also want to apply the hurricane kick to this control rig. I'll unhide my hurricane kick armature and just assign it as a source skeleton. Select my control rig and apply animation to control rig. And here it is. So again, if you're working with control rig, first remove the forward motion from the simple Mixamo armature because it's much easier, and then apply the tweaked motion to the control rig. The next technique is making the character walk in any direction that you want. So for that, you're going to need a character that walks in place. I already have that. And I also want to make the animation loop. Again, easy. Go to Graph Editor, select all curves, and instead of going to channel extrapolation, you can actually use a shortcut, Shift E, and choose Make Cyclic. And now to make the character walk in space, you have a couple of options. If you go to pose mode, this is currently the root of the armature, but it is already animated. So animating this bone will not work well. So what we can do is go to edit mode, add a new bone, then choose individual origins, go to side view, press R and then 90 on the numpad, and that will place this bone flat on the ground. You can scale it down a little bit, press F2, name it root, select the hips bone, shift select the root bone, Control P, keep offset. Now if you go to pose mode, you have a new root bone that you can move freely. So now I can go to frame 1, press I to record location and rotation keyframe. Then from the top view, I'll move forward in time, move and rotate this bone, and record a keyframe. And then move some more, and move the character and rotate it some more. Right, now if we play the animation, the character will be walking along this path that we animated. You'll probably notice that the character starts the animation a little bit slow, and then it slows down again at the end. This can be improved by tweaking these curves, but this goes a little bit too deep into animation, so I'm not going to handle it in this video, but later I'm going to show you another technique which will allow you to move the character along a curve, which is much easier to control. So instead of this additional root bone, you can use another technique. So I'll go to edit mode, select the root bone and delete it. Now the animation won't be here anymore. So instead of using the root bone, you can just grab the armature in object mode and animate it. So I'll do the same thing. With the armature in object mode, press I, location and rotation. Move forward in... Let's see, let's start this over. At frame 0, press I to record location and rotation keyframe. Move forward in time. Move my character. Record a keyframe, and so on and so forth. So what's the difference between using the additional bone and the armature in object mode? Not much. It's a matter of taste. Use whichever you prefer. If you don't want to add this new bone, then just use the armature in object mode. But yeah, either way is fine. I'm going to delete the object transforms, and let's just cover what to do if you're using the control rig. I'll create a control rig. Select all controls, make them cycle. And now for the control rig, I'll simply recommend using this master control, which is basically a root. Right, so same thing. Add a keyframe, and it seems like the control rig changes something in the keying options. It enables a keying set, so if you want to disable it, you can disable location and rotation here. This is in the timeline keying, right? But other than that, is the same workflow. Go forward in time, move the character, record a keyframe. You can even enable auto keying. So next I'll move some more and move the character, and that will record a keyframe automatically. So now I have the animation. Next, we're going to make the character walk along a curve, and this can make it very easy to control the movement of your character, even if you're not a professional animator. So again, I have a character walking in place. I'm going to make it cyclic as well. Then in the 3D view, Shift A, curve Bezier, and that will give me a Bezier curve. Then I'll go to edit mode, and right away go into the overlay options and enable this checkbox. And that will display these arrows which show the direction of the curve. Now from the top view, select the whole curve in edit mode, right? And move the starting point of the curve around the 3D cursor. Okay, it doesn't have to be perfect, just around here. Then you can switch to 3D cursor and rotate this curve. Then you can go back to bounding box center. And now I can move, rotate, and scale these points. I can press E to extrude another segment and shape my curve. So this will become the path along which my character will be walking. So now I'm going to create my root bone, just the same as before. Parent the hips to the root bone, then go to pose mode, and now we'll set up the constraint that makes this bone move along the curve. Go to the bone constraints tab, not to the object constraints, but bone constraints. Add a follow path constraint. For the target, choose the Bezier curve. Now, if we play with the offset, you'll see the character kind of moves along this curve. If we also enable follow curve, it will also orient itself along the curve, which is nice. Now it's facing the other direction. Just switch the forward axis to -y. And now if you give it negative offset, you'll see the character sliding along the curve in the forward direction. So I'm not sure why offset has to be negative here, but it's not a big deal. So now we have things almost set up. I'll go to frame 0 and press I over the offset value. And now I can just go forward in time, set some offset, and press I, and you'll see the character walking along the curve. Now that is nice, but I'm going to undo and go to frame 30, which is 1 second for my animation. My frame rate is 30 FPS. If yours was 24, for example, then you should go to frame 24. Now for the constraint, at frame 30, I'm going to set a value of 13 or -13. Because 13 actually means 1.3 meters. And the average walking speed of a human is around 1.3 meters per second. So that is exactly what I want. I'm going to add a keyframe here. Then in the graph editor, find the offset curve, select it and press Shift H to hide everything else. Select all keyframes, press T and choose linear. So now my character is walking at a constant speed of 1.3 meters per second. Now all I need to do is press Shift E, and this time instead of cyclic, choose linear extrapolation. And that will just extend this line forward into infinity, which means that my character will just keep walking at this constant speed. And because of the constraint, it is walking along the curve. Now, if you find that this speed is a little bit too slow or a little bit too fast, you can grab this second keyframe, press G and Y, and in this case, if I move it up, the movement will become slower, and down, it will become faster. So you have to play with it and find a value which makes the walk look natural. Here is something cool that you can do. I'll create a plane, make it bigger, and subdivide it by a lot. Then sculpt it a little bit, give it some bumps and grooves. Then select the curve, go to edit mode, select everything and subdivide it to give it more points. Then go to modifiers, give it a shrink wrap modifier, and for the target choose the plane. And now the curve will conform to this terrain. Now the character will not respect this shape yet. We have to apply it first. Once it is applied, I can play the animation and you'll see that the character walks basically along the terrain. Now, if you find that the character is tilting down a little bit, you can go to edit mode, select this point here, go to the end panel, item, and tweak the tilt value. Okay, and I just want to show you that this process will work almost the same way if you want to use the armature in object mode. I'll just go to edit mode, delete the root, then select the armature in object mode, go to the object constraints this time, and use follow path, choose the Bezier curve, check follow curve, forward axis -y, so I can set a keyframe at frame 0, then at 30, I'll set offset to -13, record a keyframe, then find the offset. I still have the offset for the root bone, which I deleted, so I can delete this entire curve by pressing delete, and then this one, I'm going to press T, linear, and then Shift E, linear extrapolation. Now the character will be walking along the curve exactly the same way. And finally, let's convert this to Mixamo control rig. Select everything and make cyclic. And now for the control rig, I'm going to constrain the master control. So bone constraints this time, follow path, Bezier curve, follow curve, -y is forward, and then I can just animate. Right, exactly the same process. Make it linear, give it linear extrapolation, and we have the same result. Next, we'll start getting into combining animations. When it comes to combining animations, I highly recommend that you use the NLA in Blender. But I understand that some people may be intimidated by the NLA, so here is a slightly simpler approach. But let me just say that while the NLA looks a little bit difficult, once you learn it, and you can learn it, it is like having a superpower in animation. So I definitely recommend it, and I'll show you some NLA techniques later in the video. So keep watching. Anyway, we have this animation that we created a second ago, the character walking along the path. And now let's say that around here, I want the character to switch to another animation. And I already downloaded something that we can use. I'll import an FBX, and here I have this telling a secret animation. So the character will walk, then stop, and then perform the tell a secret animation. I'll import it. It's just a skeleton, exactly what I need. So now before we can combine them, I need to bake this animation. So I'll go to pose mode, select all of the bones, go to pose, animation, bake animation, and I'll choose visual keying, clear constraints, because I want to clear the constraint from the root bone, and I'll keep override current action unchecked. That way Blender will create a new action, and that will remove these cycling modifiers. If I override the current action, the cycles will be kept, which I don't want, so I'll uncheck it. Clear parents and clean curves can stay unchecked. Now, just in case you're moving the armature in object mode instead of using this root bone, you have to shift click on object so that the object transforms are also baked. But here I don't need this, I'll uncheck it and just leave pose and press OK. Now I have this animation fully baked. And let's say that around this point I want it to stop and then transfer into this animation. So I'll grab all of these keyframes and delete them. So the animation will stop here now. And I still have the character going forward. That is because I didn't delete some of the keyframes. Okay, now it should stop here. Now let me select the other armature, go to pose mode, select all bones, then select all curves, press Shift C, then go to the active character, pose mode. Again, I have all bones selected, and here in the graph editor, I'm going to press Ctrl V, but make sure that you deselect the root bone and then press Ctrl V. That way the character will stay exactly where it is. And so we have the character walking, then it stops, and then it starts telling the secret. And it's looking okay, but again, this is a slightly hacky technique. Using the NLA is a lot more powerful, and you have so much more control over your animation. Let's give the NLA editor a try now, and I hope you'll see how powerful it is. Non-linear animation can be complex, so it deserves special attention. I have a little series about the animation editors in Blender, which goes into a lot of detail about the NLA. So yes, you have to watch another video, but I think you'll be glad you did. For now, I'll keep things simple, and I'll try to make sure that everything makes sense, even without a deep knowledge of non-linear animation. So here I'll be using Control Rig. You can use a similar technique with the simple Mixamo armature. It should be even easier because you don't have the complexity of this Control Rig. So now I'm going to import some FBX actions. Same, I'll have the walking in place and telling a secret. I'll set the walk as the source skeleton and apply the animation to the control rig. And then the secret animation, and again apply it to control rig. So before we even go into the NLA, we have to be aware of Blender's so-called actions. So switch this area to dope sheet and then action editor. And you'll see that the current animation on the control rig is called action 005. Let's click here and rename it to secret. And also click on this shield icon here. This is very important. If you don't enable this, you may lose your animation when you save your file and then open it again later. So don't forget to enable this. And then let's go through the other animations. I have a bunch here, and here's the walk. So name this walk. And that's all I need for this scene. So let's delete the armatures. Oh, and enable the shield for the walk action. If you want to get rid of all of these additional actions, you can go to your outliner and switch it to Blender file, expand the actions, select everything that is not secret or walk, and right click and delete. And that way I cleaned up the file, I only have the animations that I want. So now I can go back to view layer. Now I can split this window here and change it to nonlinear animation. And I'll split one more all the way down and change it to timeline. I just want to be able to tweak my start and end frames. So until now we were making the animation cyclic by going into the graph editor. So I'll split another window here, go to pose mode, select everything, and here I'll press Shift E and make cyclic. And we can use this approach for the NLA, but we don't have to. So to start using the NLA, I have to use the push down button. So the walk animation is no longer the active animation. Instead, it is a strip in the NLA. So it will kind of behave the same, except that when I go past this strip, the animation will stop, even though we had it looping. If you want the animation to keep looping, you can expand this end frame, and that way the animation will keep looping within this strip. Again, once I go past the strip, it will stop playing. But the NLA has something even cooler. Let's set this to 30 again. Click on the strip and press Tab. So this will temporarily make this animation active again, and I can see the curves. So I'll select everything here, press Shift E and clear the cyclic. So the animation is no longer cyclic. And then click Tab again here. Now, even if I expand the end here, you will see that I only have one cycle of walk animation. So let's set this to 30 and scroll down, expand action clip, and find the repeat value and set it to something high, like 5 for example, and play your animation, and you'll see that it's looping. Even though if we press tab here, we can see that it's not cycling within the curves. So this is a special way within the NLA to make an action repeat over and over, and it is so much simpler to do here, and you have a lot of control. You can, for example, go for 5.5 cycles, so the animation will cycle 5 times and a half. Next, I'm going to enable the secret animation, and right away push it down, and it will become a strip itself. So now I can move the strip so that it overlaps with the end of the walk animation. Now, if you scrub through the animation, you'll see that nothing happens, and then you just have the secret animation starting. This is because of these extrapolation settings here. Currently, it is set to hold, which means that the beginning and the end of this action extends in both directions. This is also represented by the brownish color here. If I switch the extrapolation to nothing, you'll see that the walking animation now shows through, and then the secret animation begins. You can also change extrapolation to hold forward, which will only extend the end of the animation, but not the beginning. Now, if we look at the transition between walking and secret, you'll see that it's very sudden. So what you could do is add some blend in. And now you'll have a gradual transition between walking and the secret animation. You can also use auto blending, which means that Blender will automatically add blending where the strips overlap. So I can just move the strip and the blending will adjust itself automatically. Let me expand the end of the animation. Now the character is just staying in place. Let's say that we want actual movement during the walk animation. Create a new action, call it movement, select the root, and give it a keyframe. Again, you can remove this keying set from here if you like. That will give you the default Blender behavior. So let's record location and rotation and go forward in time to around here where the animation switches. And I can move the character in space. I can select these keyframes, press T and choose linear. And now we have the character walking. Then it stops here and starts the secret animation. And I still have the follow path constraint here. I can use that as well. If I keyframe this offset animation, it will just become a value inside this movement animation, and I can tweak it just like we did before. So now I can push down this movement animation. It will become part of the NLA stack. And before we finish this, let me show you another very powerful technique in the NLA, and that is add layers or combine layers. So let's create a new action and call it animation tweak. Now, something I haven't mentioned yet is that when you add an active animation, it is also added to the NLA here. If you click on it, you'll get special settings for the active animation. And so here I can switch blending from replace, which means to completely replace the layers below, to add or combine. Add and combine are quite similar. Combine is actually more powerful, but it used to have a bug, but now it is fixed. So in modern Blender, you should use combine. I'm still not used to it, and I often use add, but let's choose combine here. And so a classical example of how to use these combine layers is, let's select the hips control, give it a keyframe, then go forward, and then lower the body and give it another keyframe. Okay, and then I can grab this keyframe and Shift D and copy it forward in time. So now we'll have a character kind of lowering the body and then going back to the original pose. Right, you can do something similar with the arms. Add a keyframe, give them a separate pose. Okay, and now we have a very different walk. And this is a powerful way to edit your animations. Now be mindful of this first keyframe that you add, where there is no difference between the underlying animation and the one that you keyframe. That becomes a very special keyframe, and actually if you look at the graph editor, you'll see it. You'll see how on this frame everything is at 0. And then what you can do is grab this keyframe, Shift D, press X, and copy it. And now what you have is the original underlying NLA animation, then some change to the animation, which you can see here, the arm is extended. And then as we go back to the 0 keyframe, the character goes back to its original underlying NLA animation. So let's do something practical with this. I'll just select everything and delete all keyframes. And let's create a new action. Call it secret fix. Click on the active action in the NLA and make sure that blending is set to combine. And then I can go forward. And here where the character is telling the secret, you'll see how the arm is not exactly where it should be. So what I can do is select this IK widget. And that is why I'm using the control rig here. The same thing can be done with the simple rig, but it is so much simpler with the IK. So let's go around here. Up to here, the animation is fine, and I'll record location and rotation keyframe, and then go forward and align the arm in a way that looks more natural and more correct, and then create another keyframe. So now we have the animation is a little bit too sudden, so I could move this first keyframe back a little bit. Yeah, and now it will become more natural. So give it more time to blend. Now go forward, and here's where the animation should end. So here I could just adjust the hand a little bit and give it another keyframe. And then grab this first keyframe, Shift D, and duplicate it so that we can blend out of this animation edit. So this looks good. I want to push this action down so that it becomes part of the NLA. Now if I do it now, it will enter this empty space on the third layer, or tracks as they are called in the NLA. So let's undo, select this movement track, and then press Shift A, and that will create another track. And now if I press push down, it will become part of this top track. I can rename it if I want to. So in a nutshell, this is how I use the NLA to combine and edit animations. Once you start having animations in different blending modes, so for example, this one is in combine mode, but all of the other ones are replaced, you have to be very mindful of the blending mode. For example, if I switch the secret animation to combine, you'll see that we get a very different and weird effect. So I have to switch it back to replace. Since we used combine blending for this last strip, it will now become the default. And so the next animation you add may be again in combine mode and it could look weird. So keep that in mind and switch to the correct blending mode as soon as possible. I hope this was clear. And again, please watch my NLA videos for more info about the animation editors. Another cool NLA technique is mixing or remixing animations. For example, here we have a walk animation and another one of the character playing a guitar. So with the NLA, we can have a walking character that plays the guitar. Okay, let's organize the interface. This will be dope sheet, action editor, and this one NLA. When I have multiple rigs in the scene, I like to enable this button here, which will only show me the NLA stack for the active object. So I have to enable this armature. Let's set the action to the walk action and push it down. And right away I can make it repeat a couple of times. And then enable the guitar action and push it down as well. So now I'll select the walk again and go again to the repeat value and hold shift and tweak this value until the length of this animation is exactly the same length as the guitar action. Currently, the guitar action completely overpowers the walk action. So select the guitar action, press Tab to enter edit mode for the action, and expand the action editor, expand this summary, go to pose mode, enable X-ray, and then we can select the bones that we want to remove the influence of. So one approach is to simply select these keyframes and delete them. And now the walking action will start showing through because there are no keyframes on the legs. But I'm going to undo. There is a better way to do this. Instead of deleting them, simply disable this checkbox. So this way you keep your original animation if you want to reuse it later on. And so the process is much less destructive. Now, we can see the walking animation, kind of, but it is a little bit weird. And that is because this hips animation is using the guitar action, but it should be using the walking animation. So just select the hips and uncheck it. So that disables the hips animation from the guitar action, and we only see the walk animation of the hips. Right? So now we have something that works. But there is something else that we could do. Let's go to edit mode again and select the spine bones and disable them. So now the spine movement from the guitar action was completely disabled. But what if I wanted a little bit of that movement, but not 100%? I'm going to press Tab here to go out of edit mode. And then with the mouse over here at the tracks, press Shift A, and that will give me another track. Then I can go to the beginning of the animation, and now press Shift D and press Y, and then click to confirm. Now we have another copy of the guitar action. I can press Tab here to start tweaking it. Select all bones and just disable the checkbox from all of them. And then select only the spine bones without the hips and enable them. So now we isolated the spine movement into a separate strip. Now I can go here and enable animated influence. Expand the settings and you'll see the influence slider. Now this setting is a little bit weird. You can just adjust it. You have to enter a keyframe. And so the keyframe is on frame 1. So if you are on another frame, just go to frame 1 and you'll see the slider become yellow and the white keyframe next to it. Change this influence to something else like 0.5 and press I while hovering over it. So that will change the value. And you'll see here in the strip itself, there's this line which shows that we are now playing this action at 50%. So now we have the walking spine movement mixed with a little bit of the guitar spine movement. If you don't like the value of 0.5, you can go back to frame 1, change it, and again press I to record the keyframe. And that will change the way it looks. You can even animate this over time. So for example, here I am at frame 81. I'll go all the way to influence of 1 and keyframe it. And you'll see the curve here showing how the influence changes. Then maybe go a little bit further and reduce the influence again. And we'll have little influence, then going to full influence and back to little influence. If you want to tweak this, you should go to the graph editor and find the influence curve. And here I'm just going to delete these additional keyframes. So that leaves me with a value of 0.3. I can select this value and press GY and move it and change the influence this way. So here we use this simple Mixamo armature. And actually, until you get very comfortable with the NLA, I would advise you to use this simple armature, because with the complex control rig, there is a lot that can go wrong. So if you want to finalize this, you can select all bones, go to pose, animation, bake action, and bake it with just visual keying. Set the end frame, press OK. Okay, now I have a new action and I can completely disable these NLA tracks, and I'll have the exact same action that I created in the NLA. Of course, I can go to Mixamo, create my control rig, and it will play this same animation. Most of the techniques in this video rely on the character being animated in place. And if you want to keep things simple, that is what I recommend. But let's say that you need to deal with animations that move in space, like this walk, for example. Here is the basic technique of making this work in the NLA. I'll organize my interface, name my animations. This is the walk, and this is idle. Enable show only selected. Select my main armature. Choose the walk and push it down. And then the idle and push it down. For the walk, I'm going to have it repeat 3 times. So I want the character to walk for 3 cycles and then play the idle animation. And it should all be seamless. So let's move this idle strip at the end of the walk. Make it auto blend. By the way, this is another way to fix the upper animation overpowering the lower animation. Without blend in, the idle overpowers the walk. But when we enable blend in, the idle strip basically starts at a disabled state and then it is gradually enabled, so the walk is visible. So I don't have to change the extrapolation settings. Now let's see what we are dealing with. We have the character walking forward, and then at the end of each cycle, it goes back to its origin. So create a new action, call it teleport fix or something like that. Blending mode replace is exactly what we need. Let me delete these armatures. And now I'll grab this armature and animate it in object mode. I'll go to the frame just before the teleporting happens and insert a location keyframe, or even location and rotation if you need to. In this case, my character always looks forward, so I don't need any rotation keyframes. Then change to the side view and place the 3D cursor at the heel of the character. Go to the next frame, move the armature object on the Y-axis and align it with the cursor, and record another keyframe. So now we'll have the character walking, and it will just keep walking. There will be no teleporting issue. You can check your transition carefully here. Maybe I need to push this a little bit further, and it will look better. So now we have to take care of the next cycle. So go to the keyframe before the teleporting happens. Record a keyframe. Set your 3D cursor. Go to the next frame. Move the character. Record a keyframe. And that is a basic technique. Now let's see what happens at the transition between walking and idle. Because of the blend in, we have this sliding effect. So here you should be fairly certain that this is exactly how much blend in you want. When you are, go to the frame where the transition begins, insert a keyframe, set your 3D cursor, go to the end of the transition, move the character, and record another keyframe. If there is a little bit of wobbliness in the transition, you can try selecting these keyframes, pressing T and choosing linear. This works, but the transition is a little bit too fast and there is a little bit of sliding in it. So I think we can do better. So I'm going to increase the repeat value to 3.5 here. This line indicates where the next cycle begins. So I would suggest avoiding overlapping this upper action between the cycles of the lower action. So I'll move it to around here where the next cycle begins. I can delete these keyframes. I'll have to reset them. So one frame back, and here I have to record a keyframe and move one frame forward, move the character on the y-axis, record a keyframe. And let me decrease this repeat value just slightly so that it matches the frame. Okay, and now let's see what happens. We want this heel to move just a little bit forward. Record a keyframe. Make it linear. Now it almost works, but then in the last couple of frames there is a little bit of sliding. So let's go to the frame before the sliding starts to happen. Around here. Move the character back a little bit. So let's record a keyframe here. Then move forward. Then go to this keyframe and move the character forward a bit and record a keyframe. Yeah, now there's no sliding, or almost none. Yeah, this looks reasonable. So fixing these transitions is certainly possible, but it can be tricky, so you may want to save yourself the trouble and use animations that stay in place. This has been an epic video to produce. If you liked it, please don't forget to click like, subscribe, share, and so on. And let me know if there is something else you would like me to cover. If there are animation challenges that you still cannot solve, I will consider them and I might demonstrate them in a future video. Oh, and if you're serious about rigging and animation, check out academy.cgdive.com. There you'll find exclusive courses. I'm building the Academy to be the #1 place where people can learn rigging and animation in Blender.